Okie dokie. So, yeah, just to remind you, actually, just to remind you of the image of the Eightfold Path. So there we've got the Dhamma Chakra, the wheel of the Dharma, and we're almost, we're more than halfway around now. We're actually almost almost finished our sort of circuit, so to speak, of the different limbs, the different aspects, the different spokes of the wheel. So we've looked at perfect vision, this glimpse of reality, this glimpse of the way things are, this deeper understanding of what's really going on. And we've seen how what the Buddhist path is about is, in a way, bringing our whole life up to that level by transforming the different aspects of our being, the different aspects of who and what we are. So we saw that the main work initially is to find an emotional equivalent to what we've seen and what we've understood. And we do that by, practicing perfect emotion, developing, metta for us is in a way one of the primary emotions that we're trying to cultivate, that solidarity of life with life. And out of that arises faith and devotion, out of that arises compassion, out of that arises sympathetic joy and equanimity. And then we saw how speech, we need to, in a way, transform our speech, transform the way that we communicate. Communication, of course, being of central importance to human beings. That's what we do. We communicate with each other. We form ourselves into relationships. We form ourselves into groups. And that's the basis of most of what we do in our lives, is based on communication. So that's the perfect speech aspect. And then the perfect action aspect, which is the fourth limb, is about looking at the way that we behave, how we express what's in our mind and our actions, and how we can work with that. And we also heard about the whole thing about the whole way of looking at what we do and what we think and what we say in terms of unskillful and skillful. So we're trying to move from unskillful states of mind and actions to skillful and ever more skillful states of minds and actions. So, of course, we're not just talking about a binary thing, black and white. In a way, unskillful and skillful is like two parts of or two directions on a spectrum, from sort of something that's grossly unskillful to something that's highly positive. So it's more of a sort of a continuum rather than just something that's black or white. But it is useful to think about it in those terms of what direction are we headed in? Are we headed in a skillful direction and an unskillful direction? And I think partly that points to the fact that in Buddhism, Buddhism's got a kind of a dynamic understanding about life. We're always going somewhere. And what we need to become aware of is where we're going. So the perfect livelihood part of the path is about looking at that dynamic of skillful and unskillful in relation to work, in relation to our economic activity. And we saw that stands for the whole transformation of society. So the fifth limb represents the transformation of the collective, not just the transformation of the individual, which is what most of the stages of the path are concerned with. And then we heard about perfect effort, which is actually being a little bit more specific, a little bit more fine-grained, by actually examining what we need to do to prevent unskillful mental states from arising in the first place through guarding the gates to the senses, by eradicating unskillful mental states that are already present. And it was really interesting in our group just talking about that, what that means in practice. So last week, in a way, I threw quite a bit of material at you, and hopefully, I mean, it certainly I was certainly clear that and the people in my group have kind of managed to make something of that in their own experience, to recognize the tendencies, to recognize the directions of travel in terms of our own minds, in relation to, for example, the five hindrances. There's also, of course, developing skillful mental states. So we saw how we're developing states that cohere, states of harmony, states of integration, states of deepening concentration. And then fourthly, the fourth perfect effort was developing, rather maintaining those skillful mental states that we've already cultivated. And yeah, again, it's something to think about. One of the ways that we cultivate and maintain, particularly the way that we maintain, is by putting the conditions in place that continue the positive momentum that we've developed. And a big part of what we're trying to do with the Dublin Buddhist Centre is to simply provide those conditions for people to maintain and continue to develop their practice. So more about that in a moment, but it is quite an important consideration to recognise that it's not just a matter of one's own personal effort in terms of one's own willed action. One needs to also think about what the conditions are that support that, because it's very, very difficult to do that all on your own. So that brings us to the seventh limb, the seventh aspect, the seventh spoke of the wheel, which is perfect awareness, our topic for this evening. So if you read the book, many of you have got the book, I know, and if you would have read the chapter on perfect effort, Sangharakshita talks about perfect effort as taking place with the background of the whole of evolution. It's quite a broad kind of perspective. So what we're talking about is the fact that human beings have got to a certain point through natural biological evolution, and what Buddhism is about, what perfect effort is about, is in a way consciously developing from there. And he talks about that as being a higher evolution. So in a way, the lower evolution is a collective thing where we develop as a species. And then human beings can develop that. We can develop ourselves from that point. The crucial difference is that whereas the lower evolution, from amoeba to human being, as it were, is like a collective, unconscious process, that the movement from a self-aware human being and onwards to awakening is a conscious path. It involves the deliberate cultivation of awareness in particular. So this really does bring us to tonight's topic, which is, as I said, perfect awareness. So actually, rather than leaving that to chance, we actually actively try and cultivate awareness. And I was just saying in the group actually just now that there's an intimate relationship between awareness and effort. It's like there's a sort of a feedback between the two. Our effort needs to be based on our awareness. We need to actually work appropriately with what's going on, which requires awareness. And then the more effort we make, our awareness deepens. So it is this kind of cumulative process of both applying effort and then becoming aware of where we are, and then applying effort and then becoming aware of where we are. So it's a little bit, you could say it's almost like there's an active dimension and a receptive dimension all the time in that process of growth. So the word that we're translating as perfect awareness is samyak smriti in Sanskrit, or sammasati in Pali. So Pali and Sanskrit are two of the languages which a great many of the Buddhist texts, the Buddhist scriptures, the words of the Buddha were written down in. And sati, or smriti, literally means memory or recollection. So it's usually translated as mindfulness or sometimes awareness, but it literally means memory or recollection, which is interesting, and we'll see why that's significant as we go on. Remembering what it is that we intended to do and coming back to that, returning to that. So again, if you've read the chapter in the book, what Sangharakshita does when he talks about mindfulness is he starts by talking about an example of unmindfulness, and he gave this talk in a basement in London in 1968, so more than 50 years ago. in quite a different environment. And one of the principal differences, I suppose, between then and now is the whole advent of digital technology, personal digital technology. So mobile phones in particular, computers. So in a way, life was simpler, I think. And he describes this example of unmindfulness as somebody writing a letter, an urgent letter, and then getting distracted from writing the letter because the phone rings. And then after they've chatted to the person on the phone, they feel a bit thirsty. And then someone next door plays something on the radio, and they tune into the radio, and they say, oh, maybe I'd like to listen to that as well. So they turn on the radio, they have a bit of a listen to the song on the radio, and then somebody calls by and knocks on the door, and they go to the door, and then they realise that they were writing a letter, but they've completely forgotten that they were doing that, and they've now missed the post. So that's the example he gives, and it's quite interesting just to notice that I think in a way the potential for distraction is multiplied probably 100-fold since then. I was just thinking of a more contemporary example of unmindfulness is that I was just writing this actually earlier today on my computer, and that thing where you're writing an email. So somebody's written you an email, you need to respond, and it's relatively urgent. So you're writing the email, and then you've got another, let's say a social media site, a social media app on your computer. So what happens if I get a WhatsApp message is my computer goes bing, and I can look at it if I want to. So I look at it, let's say I look at it, yeah. So I look at the WhatsApp message, and the WhatsApp message is a message from a friend, and it's a video. Yeah, it's a little YouTube link to a YouTube video. It's, I don't know, like a performance at the Grammys or I don't know, something. So I've come to a bit of an impasse in my email, and I think, I'll just watch it just for 5 minutes. So I click on the link, and then the YouTube pops up, and I watch a video for 5 minutes. I quite enjoy it. It sort of takes me away from the irritation and maybe the frustration that I have experienced writing the email. And then after the video finishes, of course, what happens is you get another video. So it's almost as if YouTube sort of in a way replicates the way our mind works. It just works by association. So you think of one thing, you think of something that's associated with that, and YouTube works in a similar kind of way. So, obviously it's programmed. It's the algorithm knows what you're interested in and gives you something which they think you'd be interested in. The chances are that you are interested in it. So you watch another video. And then maybe you watch just 2, or maybe you watch 3, but after a while you start to have that horrible feeling that you're skiving, that you're actually supposed to be working and you're not. So you think you better get down to back to your email. But then what happens, of course, is that you look at the time, and quite a bit of time's elapsed, and you look at the time and think, oh, blimey, I've got that Zoom meeting that's starting in 5 minutes or 2 minutes. So you immediately log into your Zoom and you click on them, and then you're in this meeting. Yeah, so you're in a meeting, and the meeting goes on for an hour. And and then after the Zoom meeting, you're starting to feel like you've been looking at your computer screen for 2 or 3, 4 hours at this point, and you really need to have a break. You think, I need to get away from my computer screen. So you feel a bit frazzled. So you think, I'll just pop out for 10 minutes, go to the shops, get those things I need for dinner tonight. So you do that, you pop out to the shops, you come back, and then you go back to your computer after you've had a cup of tea and a snack, and then you've got a vague, uneasy feeling that there was something that you needed to do, but you can't quite remember what it was. So you're sitting there, you're rummaging around on your computer, looking at different things, and you can't remember and then you notice there's another email, which is actually urgent. So then you think, oh, well, I just need to get on with that. So you get on with that. And then you realize after you've finished that, when you log back onto your other email account, that there was that other email that you haven't finished, and actually, the moment's passed. So that's probably something more like what happens in our work of just, we're just distracted from distraction by distraction, to use T.S. Eliot's phrase. So that's a kind of, probably for a lot of us, it would be an example of unmindfulness, where we kind of lose the thread of what we were doing because of distraction. We just literally forget what we were doing. So what that does, a little story like that demonstrates, it demonstrates unmindfulness. It demonstrates the opposite of perfect awareness. And you could say that it's characterized by forgetfulness. We forget what we're doing. There's no memory. So again, this is where the fact that Samyak Smrti is translating the word for memory is relevant. And then the question is, well, why are we forgetful? And the reason that we're forgetful is because we get easily distracted. Now, I notice this really keenly, that sometimes when I'm working, I'm almost looking for a distraction. If I'm not engaged in what I'm doing, it's like my mind is actively looking for something else which is more interesting. So if I see something out the window, if I get a message on my phone, there's already an impulse to look at it. If I'm really concentrated on what I'm doing and absorbed in what I'm doing, I don't have that problem. But if there's a wavering, then I'm easy. It's easy to get distracted. So what that suggests, or what that points to, is poor concentration. There's a lack of a unity of mind, a lack of togetherness, which is probably one of the hindrances is an operation there, which is reflective of, or which indicates a poor concentration. And with poor concentration comes an absence of continuity of purpose. So this is, of course, very much connected with forgetfulness. We don't have that sense of following through with something, of bringing something to its fruition, to bringing something to completion. We kind of keep losing the track of what we're doing, and then we start something else, and we never kind of finish a cycle. And with that, because there's no real individuality, there's no real sense of a self, a individual person going somewhere, doing something. We're often a whole kind of collection of different selves that are all answer to the same name, probably, but it's as if there's lots of different selves, lots of different strands to our being that are all actually moving in different directions. So that's an example of unmindfulness. And really what we're talking about when we're talking about mindfulness or awareness is the opposite of that. It has the opposite qualities. So what we're talking about is where there's recollection. So if you're in a mindful state, you recollect what you're doing. You know what you're doing. And there's undistractedness. So you don't have that impulse to move somewhere else. So in other words, there's concentration. So it's interesting, the word recollection actually suggests concentration. Recollect has the double meaning of remembering, but also of collecting, of gathering together. We recollect. So concentration, and we talked about this last week when we looked at absorption, when we looked at developing skillful mental states. Concentration means that the different aspects of our being kind of come together, they flow together, they're harmonized, they're integrated. And with that concentration, there's a continuity of purpose, there's a steadfastness of purpose. So we're able to set out on a particular course and stay on it. We don't get diverted. We stay doing what we're doing. This is what's really great about the mindfulness of breathing, actually. It helps us to do that. It helps us to develop these qualities of recollection, undistractedness, concentration, continuity of purpose. Particularly the counting helps establish that. And then we have a sense of a continually developing individuality. So we feel like we're actually growing as an individual. We are growing as an individual when we're able to establish that kind of mindfulness. So those I think those qualities very aptly describe what a mindful state is like. So recollected, undistracted, concentrated. There's a continuity of purpose, and there's continually developing individuality. So when we talk about mindfulness, we're always talking about being aware. We're not just aware; we're aware of something. The mind always has an object. It might be all over the place, or it might be steady, but the mind has an object. So when we talk about awareness, we're talking about being aware of different aspects of the total experience of being alive. So what I wanted to do is to talk about it in terms of 4 levels of awareness. And you could say that it's a deepening thing. So first of all, we're aware of things. We're aware of our environment. We're aware of objects in our environment. And then secondly, we're aware of self. We're aware of ourself, our body, our feelings, our thoughts, and our emotions. And then we're aware of other people. So yeah, developing awareness that other people exist, to put it simply. And then fourthly, awareness of reality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the first two before the break, and then I'll talk about the second two after we come back, because I've already said quite a bit. So in terms of developing awareness of things, so yeah, like I said, this is about being aware of our environment. It's being aware of what's around us. So I remember when I first learned to meditate, which was in the mid-90s in Wellington in New Zealand. The Buddhist centre there was quite similar to the one we have in Dublin, actually, except it was upstairs. And it was on quite a big one of those kind of showcase sort of streets, if you know what I mean, a little bit like O'Connell Street. And like O'Connell Street, it had a median strip up the middle. But in this case, it was grassed, and there was flower gardens in the middle of the median strip. And I remember coming out of the meditation one day, and I was just walking across to get into my car to drive home. And I noticed that the garden was full of flowers. And it was weird. It's like I'd never noticed flowers before. I knew that they were there, but I never really appreciated them. I never really looked at them. And I was in my early 20s, and it was actually weirdly kind of almost a revelation to me that flowers was something worth looking at. People used to talk about them, particularly my mother would talk about flowers and how wonderful they were, but I could never really get it. But I remember just actually looking at them and appreciating them. And you might have noticed that yourself, that just through practicing meditation, you start developing this awareness, this appreciation of things. You start wanting to look at things in your environment a little bit more. So what we're talking about here is actually looking at things deliberately. Yeah. So rather than just sort of things pass through our field of vision, actually paying attention to them, giving them attention, looking at them. I remember one of the things I did, it was a few years ago now, but I really enjoyed it, was I did a drawing class, and I turned up at this class, and there was about 15 of us, and there's an absolutely fantastic teacher, and she gave us each an apple, and she deliberately gave us apples that were grown in a tree. They weren't grown in a tree. They weren't commercially produced apples, is what I mean. They were grown from a friend of hers had an apple tree, I think, and she had these apples. And they're all quite different. She was sort of saying, I don't want to give you a Tesco apple. I want to give you an apple that's got a bit of character. And what she was saying is that you really have to look at the apple. You know, we've got an idea of an apple in our mind, but she's saying you really need to look at the apple and draw the apple that's in front of you rather than the apple that's in your mind, the sort of kind of caricature of an apple. And it was a really brilliant exercise, actually. I got really concentrated on drawing this apple, really enjoyed myself. And it felt like she was teaching, really what she was teaching was awareness of things. That was what she was teaching us. And she was teaching us that in order to draw something, you have to look at it. And another way of thinking about that is, in order to really be creative in response to our environment, we really need to know what our environment is. We need to know, we need to understand, we need to see, we need to pay attention to what's going on around us to really respond creatively to it. What it means is that we begin to see things in themselves rather than seeing things in terms of what we can get from them. So just appreciating, like today, just appreciating the blue sky and the sunshine for the sake of it. It's easy on a day, actually, like today. But you're just enjoying things, enjoying the daffodils just for their own sake. So that's just a brief kind of sense of what awareness of things is about, is really paying attention to not just the natural environment, but also the created environment. Paying attention to where we are, what's around us. And then there's awareness of self. So this is in a way where we begin to pay attention to who and what we are, what's going on. So this starts, there's, generally speaking, there's the easiest way to think about this, I think, to start with, is thinking about it in terms of the body, being aware of the body, being aware of feelings and emotions, and being aware of thoughts. There's different ways you can do this in the Buddhist tradition, but this is the most simple, the easiest way to start. So it starts with being aware of the body and its movement. So what we're trying to do is become aware of what we do with our bodies, the way that our body moves. And again, if you do the mindfulness of breathing, which is a practice of this, it's a more intensive practice of mindfulness of the body. In a way, this sort of starts happening naturally, but you can actually extend that awareness of the body from the meditation out into the rest of your life. So just try and be more deliberate, more conscious about the way that you move your body and what you're doing with your body. So some of you might have done mindfulness courses and actually done things like try to, when you're brushing your teeth, for example, be aware more vividly about what you're doing when you do that. When you're washing the dishes, when you're getting dressed, when you're moving around, noticing the way that you move your body. What tends to happen is that you become more deliberate in your actions. You become more concentrated, and actually things slow down a little bit. But weirdly, you actually become more effective. You become more, because you're more focused, you might be working more slowly. You might be engaging with what your task is more slowly, but you actually get more done because there's more of yourself attending to what you're doing. I remember seeing a documentary about an orchestra. It was the Berlin Philharmoniker. There's a big famous orchestra based in Berlin, and they were doing a tour in Asia, as it happened. And one of the musicians was the oboe player. So an oboe is a double-reeded instrument that many of you will be familiar with. And there was a workshop, and the oboe player in the orchestra was teaching some less experienced oboe players some stuff about playing the oboe. And one of the oboe players was kind of playing their oboe, moving around like this. And what the guy was saying was, he said, it takes a lot of energy to play the oboe, and you want all of the energy that you have to go into the reed and into the instrument. You don't want to be moving around all over the place. You want, and then he played, and you could see the focus, the concentration was in that point and into the instrument. And what he wasn't sort of wasting energy by moving his body around. So it's just an interesting example of this kind of thing of in a way, bringing a more awareness to the way that we're moving our body to focus our attention on what it is that we're doing. Often our body's doing all kinds of things that dissipates our energy. So again, I think part of what we're trying to do with awareness is gather our energy together. So again, we talked about this a little bit last week. Yeah, so when we do this, when we develop mindfulness of the body, in a way, our movements, our bodily movements, have more of a kind of a rhythm to them, and it makes us, I think, a little bit more ceremonious. Not in an artificial way, but we're just a little bit more aware of the sort of ceremony of things like eating. I think a lot of modern life is very unceremonious. It becomes quite utilitarian. So we eat because we're hungry and we need fuel. Whereas in days gone by, eating was more of a kind of a ritualized thing. You get together with other people. People would say grace even, and there'd be kind of rituals about how you distribute the food around the different people who are gathered together. But these days, often it's much more kind of unceremonious. It's sort of more utilitarian. So I think, again, mindfulness can bring a sense of ceremony, a sense of ritual even to the activities that we do, our interactions with others in particular. Anyway, so that's a little bit about the body and its movements. And then we become aware of our feelings and emotions. So in a way, we looked at this very much last week in terms of perfect effort. So what we need to do is actually just know what state we're in, just actually to understand what's actually going on, whether we're happy, whether we're sad, whether our energy's kind of high, whether our energy's low, whether we're angry, whether we're loving, whether we're craving or whether we're contented, whether we're in a state of doubt and indecision and uncertainty, or if there's a sense of commitment and clarity. So we need to know that. And interestingly, often the way we come to know that is through paying attention to our body, because it's not like our body and our emotions are discrete systems. They're interrelated. Now, what happens is if we're aware of our mind in this way, aware of our feelings and emotions, if there are unskillful states, they'll tend to be resolved. So I was saying this in the group earlier, actually, is that even just the fact of being aware has a transformative effect. The fact that we're aware of what's going on in our mind has a transformative effect all on its own, just through awareness. And if there are unskillful mental states there, they'll tend to be resolved. If there are skillful mental states, they'll tend to be refined. In other words, the skillful mental states with attention, with awareness, will tend to be refined and intensified. And very often, in order to move forward, all we need to do is just pay attention. We don't need to do anything with that except just be aware. Again, it's something to be explored and experienced. It's difficult to speak about it. The third aspect of awareness of self is awareness of thoughts. So most of us have this stream of thinking that goes on. And when we become a bit more aware, we notice that, don't we? We notice what we're thinking about. And we notice often that it's kind of going on, kind of automatically. It just kind of runs on. So being aware of thinking is just knowing what we're thinking. So if somebody says, "Oh, what are you thinking about?" You actually know what you're thinking about, rather than just it just being the sort of random, inchoate flow of bits and pieces, which it often is. Now, what the Buddha encourages, what the Buddhist tradition encourages, is to be aware like this all the time. So we're aware of our body, we're aware of what our mind is doing in terms of emotions and thoughts all the time. And often this process starts for a lot of us with meditation. Meditation is a more intensive practice of awareness, you could say. You're just trying to practice cultivating awareness. You're not trying to do anything else except that. Usually in our lives, if we're trying to be mindful, our awareness is a little bit more diffuse because we have to engage in more complex activities. So that's just a little bit about mindfulness of self. What we'll look at after the break is mindfulness of other people and mindfulness of reality. But I just want to, I gave a heads up earlier just about thinking about what's next. So we're week 7 of an 8-week course, and there's still a good few of us hanging in there on the course, which is really brilliant. Because it's quite a thing to do an 8-week course, particularly with material that's very challenging, which this material is. So I just wanted to let you know that there's about 2 courses. So basically, starting on the 13th of April, which is a couple of weeks after this course finishes, I'm going to be doing another course at the same time on the same evening about work. So we're going to be looking in more depth about the whole area of work and how to bring some of these principles into our work. And I'm particularly conscious of the fact that for a lot of us, our work is different from normal. And I don't actually just mean paid work, by the way. All of us have probably got some work that we need to do of some kind. So it's about how can we bring some of the principles of the Dharma, like what I've been talking about tonight, into our work. So that's a 4-week course. And then Vajrashura, a good friend of mine, is also leading a course starting on Mondays on the 19th of April. That's a 5-week course, and it's looking at the worldly winds. So we often, through our lives, or always in a way, buffeted by praise and blame, by gain and loss, by fame and infamy, and by pleasure and pain. And part of what we're trying to do with the Dharma practice is recognize those things for what they are. And again, it's about keeping that continuity of purpose regardless of the winds that are blowing around us. So that course is also based on a book, Sailing the Worldly Winds. And just to give you something else that's happening at the centre is on this coming Friday, I'm going to be talking to an order member called Parami. Parami's from Glasgow, and she was involved in London in the 80s in our movement, and she got very heavily involved in supporting people in the HIV and AIDS crisis. So there's quite a few parallels between that time and this time that we're living in now with COVID. And she's going to be basically talking about that time and talking about, it's an interview. I'm going to be interviewing her, talking about how she, what difference it made being a Buddhist to working in that very, very difficult environment in that very, very challenging time. So that's How to Survive a Plague, which is Friday at 7:00. And there's details about how to join that on the website. So we'll have a break now. It's, what is it? It's 3 minutes past 8. So we'll come back at 13 minutes past. And if you've got any questions about anything we've done on the course, anything I've been talking about for the last 20 minutes or so, do please feed them into the chat, and we'll look at them. We'll look at them afterwards. So come back at 13 minutes past. Okay, so we'll make a start. So there's no questions, which is good actually, because I've got quite a bit more to say. We've been talking about there's 4 levels of awareness. So starting with things, and then we become aware of ourselves, we become aware of our body, we become aware of our thoughts and emotions, feelings. And then the next level is awareness of others. So the principal thing that we're trying to notice here is not just relating to people as things. So often we're aware that other people are there. We're aware of them as being part of our environment, but we don't go beyond that. So really the key aspect of awareness of others is that we're not just aware of them, but we're aware that they exist from their own side. So they're not just something that exists from our perspective, that's something that exists from their perspective. And this is a really strange thing about other people, is that we're aware of them and they're aware of us. Whereas if you're aware of, like a building, you're aware of the building, but the building isn't aware of you, probably. Somebody might like to challenge that, but it's probably safe to say that the building's not aware of us, but another person is aware of us. And of course, again, this ties in very much with communication, that when we're really deeply aware of somebody else and they're very deeply aware of us, it enables a much deeper kind of communication to emerge that may be actually non-verbal. You may communicate just by being together. And I think when you develop friendship, relationship that's deep and intimate and mutually sensitive, you do sometimes have that experience of just being with somebody and almost communicating with them, but without needing to actually say anything verbally. So this, of course, is greatly enhanced by the practice of the metta bhavana. When we practice metta bhavana, we're actively trying to cultivate this ability to see people for who they are. But it also means looking at people, really taking people in, really paying attention to who the people are around us. It's amazing how oblivious we can be to other people, and how we can, in a way, interpret everything about them in terms of us. That thing where you think somebody's angry with you, and you maybe start getting angry with them for being angry with you, and actually there's something completely different going on. What's going on for them has nothing to do with you. It may be a remembered grief or something for that person, and you're taking it personally. This is all part of awareness of others, really trying to just pay deep attention, to really look, really notice other people. And of course, there's a whole richness that comes with that. All of these aspects of awareness, I think it's worth pointing out that it enriches our life hugely. It brings depth to life. Awareness brings depth to life. So often we feel that life is just kind of happening on the surface, but this enables us to sort of dive more deeply into the full texture and the full possibilities of our lives. And this, in a way, brings us to the last of the 4, the deepest level, which is awareness of reality, which is really quite difficult to talk about, really. Partly because when we're talking about being aware of something, We're not talking about thinking about it. I think this is often one of the kind of mistakes that's made, as it were, with mindfulness practice. When we talk about being mindful of something, and when we're encouraged to be mindful of something, what we do is we think about it. So I've noticed this, with meditation teaching. So you encourage people to be mindful of their breathing, and what they start doing, and I'm sure I've done this myself, is you just start thinking about your breathing. You sort of almost have a little running commentary in your mind about what your breathing is. But awareness isn't really like that. It's quite hard to describe. You can be deeply aware of something or someone without producing a thought about it. There's just this awareness. It's all one can say. And this is particularly the case with awareness of reality. So sometimes it's talked about as Sangharakshita describes it as a direct, non-discursive contemplation, a direct, non-discursive contemplation. So you're contemplating without thinking about anything. So one of the ways that this is practiced in the Buddhist tradition is by developing awareness of the Buddha or recollection of the Buddha. So Buddhanusati is a traditional practice where you recollect, you bring to mind, you develop awareness of the Buddha himself. So the Buddha, of course, is reality embodied. So Buddhism tends to embody its abstract concepts in concrete images. And of course, ultimately what we want to do is embody reality in our own actions. I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is to live in harmony with reality. That's what the whole path of vision and transformation is about. We see reality and then we try and live in harmony with it. So we become the Buddha, as it were. So it's all about, reality, as it were, the truth, what's real, what's really going on. So the Buddha embodies that. The Buddha lives from that. The Buddha expresses that in his person. So we can recollect reality. We can be aware of reality by recollecting him. So there's all sorts of episodes in the life of the Buddha. Famous episodes. There's some particularly significant ones. So, for example, one of the most famous images of the Buddha is the Buddha seated beneath a great tree, the tree of awakening. And that was the moment, so to speak, when he fully embodied reality, you could say. He all of the unawareness within him was illuminated, you could say. So he became completely, fully awakened, as we say, or enlightened. So a light is very often given as a metaphor for awareness. So you can read in the Buddhist sutras accounts of his life, accounts of his approach to the tree of awakening, accounts of what happened within him on the night of his awakening, and what happened after his awakening, the different facets of that enlightenment experience, in a way kind of percolating through the different aspects of his own being. There's images of a serpent king, for example, visiting the Buddha. There's stories about him just wandering up and down, reflecting conceptually about what had happened. There's stories about him just gazing at the tree that sheltered him during that time of his intensive practice, and he's looking in gratitude. There's the moment when compassion arose in his mind, and he saw the humanity like a bed of lotus flowers in different stages of development. And then, of course, there's the moment when he left that place and went to seek out his companions and communicated this very Eightfold path that we've been exploring over the last weeks. So we can recollect those incidents in his life, and we can recollect his qualities. So, we can recollect just the state of his awareness. Like, we can imagine what it would be like, and this is part of what recollection of the Buddha is about, imagining what it would be like to be completely aware, to never have those sort of moments of dullness or moments of distraction, moments of conflict, just this deep, radiant, kind of warm, glowing awareness. And it's interesting that very often the Buddha is talked about as glowing, golden in particular. So particularly around the time of his awakening, it's said that his skin would glow a kind of golden color. Now, how literally one can take this, it's impossible to know, but it does seem to express something about the nature of awareness. And very often, traditionally in Buddhist meditation, we bring to mind the Buddha, and the Buddha, when we bring him to mind, is made of light. His body is made of light, and he radiates light. So those qualities of wisdom, those qualities of compassion, qualities of deep peace, of deep wholeness, are expressed in the image and the light, and the light in a way begins to transform us. So very often it's a kind of a golden a light that we see coming from the Buddha to us. So I've just tried to kind of evoke what recollection of reality might be, and of course, when we do that, it sets off a kind of resonance with that potential for awakening that we have within us, due to the fact that we're human beings. It's like our mind. We're made of the same stuff that the Buddha's made of, and the more we bring into mind, the more that potential is realized, which is what happens when we do those kinds of practices. And in fact, all the different levels of awareness have a very particular effect when we practice them. So awareness of things frees us from the taint of subjectivity. In other words, it frees us from everything always being about us. I think my experience with the apple, I got so absorbed in the apple, I just kind of forgot about myself for a moment. So if we're really absorbed in objects, maybe it's art, maybe it's music, we just lose ourselves in a positive sense. We forget about ourselves. We don't need to be the center of everything. Awareness of ourself in terms of our body, our thoughts and our emotions, it refines, it makes our being kind of more subtle, more responsive, more creative. Awareness of other people stimulates. So we do need the stimulation of other people. We do need to be sparked off, most of us. We do need to be enlivened. And at the moment, I really notice the lack of that. I notice that I'm more flat because I don't have that stimulating company with others. It's not the same through a computer. You kind of miss that sort of spark of interaction with other people. So that's what awareness of others gives us. And awareness of reality, it actually transforms us, it transmutes us, because we're relating with what's deepest in us to what's ultimate in the universe. And that does have the sort of transfiguring or transmuting kind of effect, a transforming kind of effect. Really, you could say it's bringing to mind that very perfect vision and embodying that in an actual practice that we do, and that transformation takes place. So that's just a little bit about mindfulness of reality. So just to sort of recap, so I've talked a little bit about mindfulness of things, mindfulness of the self, of ourself, mindfulness of other people, and mindfulness of reality. And what I wanted to do now is, in a way, just explore this in meditation, because really what we're doing when we meditate is practicing this deeply. We're practicing awareness of ourself through the mindfulness of breathing, awareness of others through metta bhavana, and so on. So if you just like to set yourself up, we'll do a little bit of meditation for the next few minutes. Well, we'll do a decent half an hour meditation, actually. So to begin with, we're just going to become aware of ourself. So firstly, becoming aware of our body. Sometimes awareness almost feels like a liquid that we allow to soak into the dryness of our body. So being aware of our body involves being aware of touch, the sense of touch and what our body is touching, what our body is in contact with. The contact that we're making with what we're sitting on, our feet and our legs. So whilst our body is still, there's no gross movement, we can still feel the sensations of our body, maybe the energy of our body in the pelvis, the lower belly, the genital region, the lower back. All that soft flesh around the base of our torso. The chest, the shoulders, the upper back. So these words, back, shoulders, what do they correspond to in terms of actual experience, sensation? The arms, right and left. The hands, the neck and the throat, the head and the face. So the body is a mass of sensation. It's also a mass of feeling. And arising within or together with the body is emotion. So what's the color of our mind right now? Just being curious, being open to the feel of it, to the inner atmosphere. And also noticing whatever thoughts are flowing through your mind. Is there a particular theme, a particular narrative? Are the thoughts rapid or relatively still? Is there a sense of confusion or clarity? So now just having a sense of the whole of ourself, our body, our emotions, our thoughts. So aware of ourself as a whole. And even though we're not moving about, our body is actually moving. It's moving because we're breathing. So beginning to pay attention, beginning to be mindful of exactly how our body moves as we breathe. Could start by paying attention to the belly. And through the movement of our breathing and paying attention to the movement of our breathing, we begin to tune into the rhythm of our breathing, the cycle of the in-breath and the out-breath. And by simply paying attention to that, we recollect ourselves, we gather ourselves together. So on the one hand, it's not a forceful, harsh kind of awareness. On the other hand, it's not a vague, unfocused, unclear awareness. We are aware with appropriate effort. And in order to develop continuity of purpose, In other words, a continuity of engagement from moment to moment. We can place a count at the end of the out breath. So just doing that in the normal way. So placing a count at the end of the out breath. If we get distracted, returning to the breathing, starting the counting again at 1. Moving now into the second stage, placing the count just before the in-breath. So a slightly more refined attention is required. So letting go of the counting, but continuing to intensify the awareness, just allowing it to gather breath by breath. There might be, with that intensifying awareness, a sense of ease, relaxation, peace, maybe even. We begin to feel that awareness like a golden light filling our body. Like the reflection of sunlight off burnished gold. And then we realize that that golden light is coming from somewhere. The golden light is coming from someone. It's coming from the Buddha, the enlightened one. seated beneath a great tree, with his arms, his hands folded in meditation posture, dressed in robes. His eyes just open, absorbed in meditation. The tree of awakening unfolding above him. But his body is not made of flesh. His body is made of light. And it radiates gold. It expresses wisdom, understanding of the way things are, and compassion, a profound solidarity with all other life. And peace, the complete pacification of all hindrances, of all obscurations. The Buddha represents the full flowering of human potential, which we ourselves possess. And as we contemplate the Buddha, we hear a sound that expresses his qualities. Muni, Muni, Mahamuni, Shakya Muni, Sadhu, 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 Muni, Muni, Mahamuni, Shakya Muni, Sadhu. So, bringing the practice to a close in your own time. So, in a way, in terms of the home practice, really, when you look at the four levels of awareness, it kind of includes everything, being aware of everything. But we're trying to be aware of different things at different times. And one way of practicing this, it's just one, I'm just going to give you one thing to practice, as it were, this week, and that is to complete your cycles. What I mean by that is when you enter into a task, try and complete it before you move on to the next task. It's very, very simple, but actually quite difficult to do. Often what we do is we start something, we don't finish it, then we start something else and we don't finish it. So we've got a whole lot of cycles open, and it has a disintegrating effect. It has an integrating effect when we're able to enter into a task, bring it to a completion, maybe even just for the moment, and then move on to the next thing. And that has this integrating effect, and it develops this continuity of purpose. So one way of practicing that is if you're about to get interrupted, for example, if you're working on something or doing something and the phone rings, before you pick up the phone or before you look at the text message, just take a note of what you were doing, and then see if you can pick it up after you've finished with the interruption. It's quite a simple thing, but actually can make a big difference in terms of practicing this ongoing concentration and continuity of purpose. So also, I just wanted to, just before we finish, actually, I'll just share a screen as well, just with that on it. So so completing your cycles. That's the practice for this week. You've probably got other things. The reason I'm giving you one thing only is you've probably got other things that you've been working on from previous weeks, so I don't want to overload you with lots of things, but this is a particularly good way of practicing awareness. And I wanted to remind you that we've been doing this course. We've been doing quite a few different courses on different times of the day. Pavra is next door doing a meditation and puja tonight. And all of the things that we're doing at the Dublin Buddhist Centre, we've been doing purely on a donation basis. And it's actually almost a year since we started doing that. We closed the centre on the 19th of March, and pretty much, I think it was pretty much right from the beginning, we decided to do everything for donations. So we're completely reliant on people's generosity to keep doing what we're doing, to keep doing classes like this, to keep providing all the things that we're providing. We're basically just asking if you can give to the Dublin Buddhist Centre to do that. And one way you can do that, which is really great for us, is by doing a standing order. So Daniel's just put the link in the chat box there. If you click on that link, you can actually go through and you can take out a standing order, which means giving the centre an amount of money every month. What that gives us is a sense of security, which is a particularly precious commodity right now, a sense of confidence even in going forward into the future, because we really want to develop what we're doing, and not just develop what we're doing in person, but also continue to develop what we're doing online, because we are able to reach people that we're not otherwise able to reach. So anyway, so we'll leave it there for this evening. Thanks for your attention, and we'll come back next week, and we'll finish with perfect samadhi, which is samadhi. Well, we'll hear about what samadhi is next week. So if you've got questions, do feel free to stick around, and I'll try and respond to them afterwards. But other than that, thanks again for Daniel for stepping in for Kevin, and thanks to all the team for helping with the groups. And we'll see you again next week.